I was secretly poisoned by my stepmother for months, ending up in the hospital with panic attacks. Betrayal, trust shattered, and nightmares consumed my life until I caught her on video and exposed the truth. This emotional true story follows my journey from fear and isolation to therapy, recovery, and finally finding healthy love. I'll never forget the smell of roses on Patricia's hands the day I collapsed. She had just come inside from the garden, her gloves still streaked with soil, and she smiled at me as I drank the tea she made. 5 minutes later, I was on the floor, chest seizing, vision tunneling. And she stood there, calm as ever, saying, "Breathe, Caleb, just breathe." That was the moment everything broke. That was the moment I realized the woman I trusted like family was the reason my body was betraying me. But let me back up. When my dad remarried Patricia, I was 16. My mom, Sarah, had just finalized the divorce, and she was holding herself together with sheer grit. I lived with dad during the school week because he was closer to my high school, and Patricia swept into our lives like a character from some suburban magazine spread. Perfect nails. A laugh that could cut glass. Roses lined her front yard, and neighbours admired her. At first, I admired her too. Back then, I was just a lanky teenager with messy hair, still collecting toy cars on my dresser even though I was old enough to drive. Patricia noticed that once and teased me. "Still into Hot Wheels, Caleb? Don't worry, every man has his little boy inside." It sounded innocent. I laughed along, but looking back, there was always something in her tone like she was cataloguing weaknesses. Fast forward to age 28, and I found myself sitting in an insurance meeting across from her. The setting was so banal: grey walls, fluorescent lights, rush hour traffic coming outside, but the tension in that room was enough to chill me, because by then I knew she'd been the architect of my panic attacks. And here's the sick part: she used medicine to control me. Tiny mistakes with pills, refills that didn't match, doses that made my heart race. She made me doubt my own body. I'd lie awake at 3 a.m, wondering if I was just too anxious or if someone was doing this to me. The first red flag came in college. I had saved $15,000 from summer jobs and gets money I wanted for a future wedding. Patricia offered to help me invest it. She said she had a friend in insurance who could make it grow. I was naive enough to believe her. 3 months later, when I asked about it, she smiled with those rose-coloured lips and said, "Oh, honey, it's tied up in fees. You'll see it again someday." Sunday never came. But the deeper damage wasn't financial. It was physical. There were nights I'd eat her cooking and suddenly feel my chest clamp shut. Probably just stressed, she'd say, rubbing my back while I gasped for air. She'd give me tea that tasted faintly metallic, different from the tea bags Sarah used at her house. Within an hour, I'd be trembling, my thoughts racing like cars skating out on black ice. Anxiety runs in families. Patricia told me once, her hand firm on my shoulder. "Your dad had it. It's just your brain chemistry." And I believed her. For years, I believed her. In high school, I'd had panic attacks before tests, but they were rare and manageable. By my mid-20s, they became so violent I ended up in the ER twice. The nurses handed me bland hospital cafeteria food on a tray while I sat hooked up to monitors, trying not to cry. I remember poking at grey scrambled eggs, thinking, why does my body hate me so much? It wasn't until years later that I realised it wasn't my body. It was Patricia. I saw the way she controlled my dad with subtle digs, guilt trips, even forgetting his blood pressure meds until he got dizzy. But he brushed it off. "She just worries about me too much," he'd say. And when I told my mom about my suspicions, she looked pained but hesitant. "Caleb," she whispered, "do you really think she'd do that?" Yes, I did. But I didn't have proof yet. The first undeniable red flag came one ordinary Thursday at 5:47 p.m. I remember the time exactly because I was stuck in rush hour traffic, late for dinner at their house. Patricia texted, "Don't worry, I'll set your plate aside." When I arrived, she handed me reheated pasta that tasted faintly off bitter, almost like aspirin dissolved in sauce. Within an hour, my heart was thrumming like a war drum. At night, lying in bed, my body shaking uncontrollably, I realised this wasn't coincidence. This wasn't stress. Something or someone was poisoning me. And that was only the beginning. I started keeping notes. Not just mental ones, physical records. Dates, times, what I ate, what I felt. I wrote them down in a cheap spiral notebook and hid it under the mattress. Every episode had a pattern. Tea, hosta, tulip. Anything Patricia personally prepared. The symptoms hit harder when it was just me eating. Dad never seemed to get sick. It made me paranoid. It made me obsessive. I'd sit in my car after dinner at their house, hands gripping the wheel, asking myself, am I losing my mind? Then I'd drive home through rush hour traffic, chest pounding, headlights blurring as panic clawed at my lungs. In high school, I'd been that kid who overstudied. I pulled all-nighters before chemistry exams, drank too much Mountain Dew, and sometimes got jittery. Teachers told my parents, he's just stressed. But I knew the difference. Those high school jitters were butterflies. What I was experiencing now was full body collapse, my muscles seizing, my mind fragmenting like glass under pressure. And Patricia always hovered nearby. She'd press a cold glass of water into my hands and whisper, "You need to calm down, Caleb. Maybe take another pill." The pills. God, the pills. She always had an opinion on my medication. When doctors prescribed mild anti-anxiety meds, she'd say, "Those don't work, you need stronger ones." When I resisted, somehow my prescriptions would get messed up, wrong dosages, refills that disappeared. Once, the pharmacy told me my order had been cancelled. I found out later Patricia had called pretending to be me. Financial betrayal still haunted me. That $15,000 wedding fund had gone. I tried to talk to a lawyer about it. His name was Gregory, a psych guy with a Rolex who kept glancing at his phone during our meeting. Honestly, Caleb, he said, leaning back in his leather chair, it's not worth pursuing. Family money is complicated. You'll just waste more in fees. I trusted him. Paid him $800 for consultation paperwork. He never filed anything. Later I found out he'd gone golfing with Patricia's insurance friend the same weekend he ghosted me. I felt surrounded. Betrayal layered on betrayal. Even when I tried to involve the police after one particularly bad episode, I ended up in the ER, heart rate spiking at 170. The officer who took my statement looked at me like I was insane. Are you sure you're not just stressed? He asked, pen hovering. A week later, I discovered why nothing moved forward. That officer was Patricia's cousin. Of course he buried my report. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. At school pickup, when I went to collect my younger cousin from my mum one afternoon, other parents kept their distance. One whispered, that's Sarah's son, the one who keeps calling 911. Another muttered, probably drugs. The shame was unbearable. I'd always been the reliable one, the quiet guy. Now people looked at me like I was unstable, dangerous, broken. At home, my sanctuary was cracking too. My mum, Sarah, tried to support me, but she had her own scars from the divorce. I believe you, Caleb, she said one night, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. But without proof, people would just think you're paranoid. I stared at the toy car still sitting in a shoebox in my closet, relics of simpler times. I wanted that version of me back. The boy who cared about engines and paint jobs, not whether his stepmother was slowly in. The breaking point came one Sunday dinner. Dad was out mowing the lawn, and Patricia served me chicken soup. It smelled faintly of roses, her damn roses, always. One spoonful in, my tongue tingled. My chest clenched so fast I dropped the spoon. Patricia's eyes flicked toward me. Pulled. Calculating. Breathe. Caleb, she said softly, like she'd rehearsed it. Something in me snapped. I pushed the bowl away, knocking it to the floor, broth splattering across the tile. What the hell are you doing to me? I shouted. My voice cracked, desperate. She didn't flinch. She just smiled. You're imagining things again. That night I swore to myself I was going to find proof. I bought a cheap camera on Amazon. Hid it in my backpack. The plan was reckless, but it was all I had left. I needed evidence, something undeniable, something that even Patricia's cousin on the police force couldn't bury. Because deep down, I already knew. She wasn't just controlling me. She was destroying me. And if I didn't stop her, I wasn't going to survive this. It took months of subtle surveillance, paranoia, and trembling hands, but finally, I caught her. One Wednesday, March 17th, 2027, around 6:12 p.m., I slipped the tiny camera into the kitchen counter, right where she always left the tea kettle. The smell of roses wafted from the vase on the table, mingling with the metallic tine of the kitchen itself. My heart was hammering, not from panic this time, but from anticipation. I watched the footage later that night in my dark apartment. The moment I'd feared was there, frozen in digital reality, Patricia, carefully measuring a powder into my teacup, glancing around like a predator. She muttered something under her breath, almost inaudible, but it didn't matter. I wasn't imagining things anymore. She had been poisoning me for months. Months. My stomach dropped. My hand shook so violently I almost dropped my laptop. And then it hit me, this wasn't just about me. The footage caught her sneaking into my younger sibling's room, my half-brother, only 12 at the time, and slipping something into his water bottle. My jaw literally hit the floor. My worst nightmare had been happening to someone I loved even more than myself. I called my mom immediately. Her voice cracked when she answered. Caleb, what did you? You need to come over, Mom. Now, she's been poisoning us, both of us. We stayed on the phone as I replayed clips for her. Sarah's hand shook as she held the phone. Oh God, I thought it was just you. I thought I was imagining it. Oh God. The betrayal ran deeper than I realized. I went to the police with the footage the next morning. The officer assigned. Yep, Patricia's cousin. Same indifferent face, same half smile. Where did you get this, Caleb? He asked. I recorded it myself. It's proof. He laughed softly. You know, I don't think this will hold up. You sure you want to pursue this? I knew then nothing official would ever help me. The law had been compromised before it even started. My reports, my complaints, everything had been buried. And then there was Gregory, the lawyer. I went back to him, hoping he'd finally do the right thing after seeing the video. Instead, he sighed, leaned back, and said, Caleb, you're making a lot of enemies over family drama. Honestly, this is messy, and I have other clients I can try, but it'll cost extra. I felt my rise. This man had taken my trust and $800 months ago, and now he was openly shrugging. Greed had cemented the betrayal at every level. At work, whispers started again. People avoided me like I had some contagious disease. At first, I thought it was paranoia, but the sideways glances, hushed phone conversations, and blank stares confirmed it. The social isolation was suffocating. Even neighbours, who had once waved as I mowed the lawn or played with the toy cars on summer afternoons, crossed the street to avoid me. I could feel their judgment, the unspoken accusation. What's wrong with that kid? Why is he always so tense? The emotional scars were immediate. Nightmares became routine. I would wake sweating, chest tight, screaming silently as Patricia's face loomed over me in dream after dream. Panic attacks came without warning, triggered by anything: the smell of roses, the metallic taste of tea, even the creak of the kitchen floorboards. My life had been rewired. Every interaction, every meal, every relationship felt like a potential trap. Therapy started to feel like a lifeline. My therapist, Dr. Lanes, had me recount every episode in painstaking detail. Caleb, she said, holding a clipboard, your nervous system has been conditioned to anticipate danger. That's why your heart races and your sleep is broken. This isn't weakness, it's trauma. I nodded, gripping the arms of the chair. Every session, I felt a little more broken but a little more understood. Even my siblings were affected. The younger one, once bubbly and carefree, now flinched at loud voices and sudden movements. Patricia's reach had extended beyond me, infecting our family with fear and mistrust. I realised then this wasn't just an isolated case of abuse. It was systemic. Friends, neighbours, even authority figures had enabled it. And Patricia had done it with surgical precision quietly, invisibly, leaving only shadows of doubt and sickness behind. By the time I finally shared the footage with a more trustworthy loyal one not compromised by greed, my world had changed. People whispered, sure, but some believed me now. Some offered support. I began documenting everything, every panic attack, every threatening glance, every stolen prescription. The red flags that I'd ignored for years were now painfully clear. The hospital visits, the ruined wedding fund, the stolen pills, the poisoned drinks, all pointing to the woman I had once called family. The social consequences were brutal. I lost friends. Even casual acquaintances avoided me. Lunch breaks at work became lonely hours staring at the bland cafeteria food, thinking of the days I'd spent lying awake in my bed at 3 a.m, convinced the teacup was a weapon. And yet even in that darkness, the first glimmer of resolve appeared. Proof existed. Evidence existed. And one day, Patricia would not be able to gaslight me or anyone else. I was terrified, angry, thick. But finally, for the first time in years, I felt the spark of control. I just didn't know how explosive the fallout would be. It was Thursday, April 8th, 2027, around 3 p.m. Rush hour had just ended and the street outside was quiet for once. I knew Patricia's pattern. Tea at exactly 7:05. Superheated in the microwave at 7:10. I had the new hidden camera ready, small and conspicuous, tucked behind the sugar jar. I stepped into the kitchen, trying to look casual. Hey, Patricia, I said, voice steady despite the adrenaline pounding through me. Caleb, dinner's ready, she chirped, holding the soup ladle with that same calm smile I had learned to hate. I made it just for you. I nodded and smiled back, heart hammering in my chest. Thanks, I'll just grab a quick sip of tea first. She handed me the cup. Her hand smelled faintly of roses, and for a moment my stomach turned. I forced myself to take the first sip while pretending to scroll on my phone. My hidden camera caught her glance at me, the way she lingered, that calculating tilt of her head. And then it happened. While she stepped away to grab napkin, I quickly swapped the cup for one I had secretly prepared earlier, identical in every way. Then I set my phone on the counter, recording her every move. She returned, unaware that the trap had been set. I saw it in slow motion. She reached for a small vial hidden behind the spice rack, something I hadn't noticed before, and poured a powder into the second cup. Her hand trembled slightly, but her smile never wavered. My jaw dropped. I didn't move. My blood ran cold. Caleb, she said softly, catching me stirring. You should be careful, wouldn't want anything to happen to you. I swallowed my fear. I already know what you're doing. Her smile folded for a split second. Then she laughed, light and cruel. Do you really, darling? I didn't say another word. I ran for the door, grabbed my phone and pressed record while dialing 911. The neighbours, alerted by the yelling and shouting, started peeking out their windows. Some even came down in robes. Within minutes, police arrived finally, but this time, I had indisputable evidence. There was no room for Patricia to charm, manipulate, or gaslight anyone. The video captured everything, her calculating movements, the hidden powder, the way she treated my siblings similarly. Patricia tried to protest, but her protest sounded hollow, rehearsed. You, this is insane, I was just cooking. Cooking? I shouted, shaking. You've been poisoning us, both of us, for months. Neighbours murmured, shocked and angry. Some yelled, what kind of monster is this? Well, the first time, I saw her falter. That perfect composure cracked. The police finally detained her, but the shock didn't end there. During questioning, the plot twist hit me like a freight train. Patricia had been manipulating my sibling for years, even before I'd started suspecting anything. My younger brother, quiet and withdrawn, revealed in trembling whispers how she'd punished him if he drank water from anyone else's cup, how she'd made him lie to protect her. I felt rage, nausea, and saw it all at once. The emotional weight was unbearable. The person I'd loved most, someone I trusted with my life, was my worst nightmare. Even the lawyer, Gregory, tried to insert himself again, but the footage was undeniable. No amount of greed could hide this now. Patricia's cousin, the police officer, was reassigned once internal investigations reviewed the buried reports. Justice, finally, had a foothold. The aftermath was immediate and intense. Dad was in shock, unable to comprehend the betrayal. How did I not see this? He whispered, staring at the floor. My mom held my sibling tightly, tears flowing freely. For the first time, I felt solidarity in my family again, but the trauma lingered like a shadow. I couldn't sleep for weeks. Nightmares returned with vengeance. The smell of roses made me nauseous. Even the bland hospital cafeteria food haunted me. It was all mixed up in my memory with the fear, panic, and betrayal. Panic attacks were constant companions. Yet I had proof. I had finally uncovered the truth. I had confronted the source, and that confrontation changed everything. Patricia was in custody. The community, once whispering about me, now rallied in support. Neighbours brought food, letters of apology, and solidarity. The social isolation that had crushed me for years began to lift, slowly, like fog burning off a morning field. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Even with that hope, I was raw, broken. I knew recovery would take years. Therapy became my sanctuary, a place where I could finally untangle the web of fear, panic, and trust issues Patricia had woven into my psyche. But for the first time since high school, I felt the stirrings of control. I had faced my worst nightmare, seen it in full, undeniable clarity, and survived. The story wasn't over. It would never truly be over, but for the first time, I had the tools to reclaim my life. Even after Patricia was behind bars, life didn't magically fix itself. In fact, the next few months were worse than anything I'd experienced before. My panic attacks became relentless. The smell of roses, the sight of soup bowls, even the sound of a kettle clicking on triggered full-blown episodes. I woke screaming at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, heart hammering at 180 beats per minute. Every noise felt like danger. The hospital became a second home. I'd sit on the plastic chairs in the ER, poking at the bland cafeteria food of grey scrambled eggs, soggy toast, tepid coffee, and feel a wave of despair. Nurses recognized me, gave sympathetic nods, and sometimes whispered, "We've seen him before." I wanted to scream, "Yes, you've seen me, and I'm broken, and it's her fault." But I stayed quiet, numbing myself. Therapy was the only constant. Dr. Lanes would sit across from me, clipboard in hand, and ask the questions I didn't want to answer. "Caleb," she said one Thursday evening, "what happens when you see something that reminds you of her?" I swallowed, my fingers twitching around the edges of the chair. I felt trapped, like my body is on fire, like I can't breathe, like everyone around me might be lying to. "That's trauma," she said. "Your nervous system was hijacked. You're safe here, but your brain doesn't know it yet." Every session felt like pulling a nail from a deep wound. Painful. Exhausting. Necessary. Socially, I was a ghost. Parents at school pickup still avoided me. Whispers followed me down hallways, and even casual acquaintances kept their distance. I'd catch coworkers exchanging subtle glances, shaking their heads in pity. Lunches became solitary affairs in the parking lot, staring at food I barely tasted. Friends I had trusted abandoned me, unable to handle the family drama, as they called it. Every betrayal replayed in my mind: Patricia poisoning me, the $15,000 wedding fund disappearing, the lawyer who took my money and did nothing, the cult cousin bearing reports. The world felt unsafe. Everyone felt unsafe. I sank into self-loathing. Nights blurred into days. Toy cars from my childhood, the ones I'd collected obsessively, sat untouched in the shoebox under my bed. I couldn't even touch them without feeling the weight of all I lost. My sibling was traumatized too, quieter, withdrawn. I wanted to fix it all, but every attempt felt like trying to rebuild a house with sandbags. I started taking anti-anxiety medication, the kind Dr. Lanes carefully monitored. At first, it barely worked. My body had been rewired to panic. The pills were just a thin layer over a gaping wound. Nightmares persisted. Flashbacks of Patricia pouring powder into cups haunted every meal. My therapist noted my hypervigilance, panic attacks, and trust issues. "We need to rewire your brain," Dr. Lane said, "not just treat symptoms. You'll need exposure therapy, grounding exercises, and months of consistent work." I nodded numbly, wondering if months or years would be enough. The community's reaction was slow. Some neighbors apologized after learning the truth. Others remained distant, unwilling to believe a family member could be so cruel. The shame lingered like a permanent stain. Even my dad seemed paralyzed, guilt etched into his face every time he looked at me. One night, after a particularly violent panic attack, I sat on the cold bathroom floor and thought about giving up. I thought about how Patricia had shattered everything: my body, my trust, my relationships. The thought of leaving therapy, leaving the apartment, leaving my life intact seemed impossible. I held a shoebox of toy cars, tears falling freely. I whispered, "How do I ever trust anyone again?" But even at my lowest point, a tiny spark of defiance survived. I started journaling every incident, every flashback, every emotional collapse. I set small goals: 1 meal a day without panic, 1 therapy exercise completed, 1 phone call to a supportive friend. It was painstaking. It was humiliating. But slowly, imperceptibly, I began to reclaim fragments of myself. By the time summer arrived, I had stabilized enough to leave the apartment for short walks, to engage in minor social interactions, to eat a meal without dissolving into terror. My sibling, now attending therapy with me, smiled more often. My mom leaned on me less but remained a steady support. The rock bottom hadn't ended with despair, it became the foundation I would eventually rebuild from. I just didn't know yet how strong I could become. Trauma still lived inside me, still whispered in every quiet moment. But the first seeds of recovery had been planted. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, I could imagine a life where I could survive, and maybe, one day, thrive. Recovery wasn't a straight line, it was a labyrinth of therapy sessions, panic attacks, and small victories that often felt invisible. I started seeing Dr. Lanes twice a week, focusing on exposure therapy, grounding techniques, and cognitive behavioral exercises to retrain my brain. I learned to recognize triggers: the faint metallic taste of tea, the smell of roses, even certain textures of hospital cafeteria trays, and faced them in controlled settings. One cold morning in October 2027, I sat in Dr. Lane's office, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug that smelled faintly of vanilla. "Caleb," she said, leaning forward, "you're no longer reacting automatically. You're noticing, processing, and choosing your response." I almost laughed. For years, I had reacted. Every heartbeat, every flashback, every panic attack had been a survival response to betrayal. Now, I was learning to reclaim control. Toy cars I had stashed under my bed became symbols. I placed a few on my desk, tiny engines and shiny paint, a reminder of the boy I once was and the man I was rebuilding to be. Step by step, I repaired my social life. I reached out to people I trusted most, explaining the trauma, the betrayals, the months of paranoia. Some didn't understand. Some couldn't handle it. But a few, my mom, my sibling, a couple of childhood friends, became pillars of support. Lunches returned, slowly at first, in quiet cafes, then to work cafeterias, sharing sandwiches instead of avoiding the room altogether. Therapy also helped me process the betrayal itself. I learned that Patricia's actions weren't my fault, that her manipulation and poisoning were malicious choices she made, not reflections on my worth. I journaled every night, sometimes scribbling until my hands cramped, detailing memories, nightmares, and small triumphs. I celebrated milestones: first panic-free meal, first uninterrupted night of sleep, first day without intrusive thoughts. In March 2028, I met someone new, Claire. We met at a local art class, laughing over a painting disaster. She smelled faintly of jasmine, carried herself with calm confidence, and never judged me when I flinched at a sudden noise or shared a memory of my panic attacks. For the first time, I felt trust without fear. I let her see the scars, both visible and invisible. She stayed. She held my hand as I recounted the poison, the betrayal, the stolen wedding fund. She never flinched. She never left. By summer, I had reclaimed pieces of independence. I returned to work full-time, re-established friendships, and even invested cautiously, this time through a reputable financial advisor, not anyone connected to Patricia or the crooked lawyer. $15,000 that was stolen couldn't be recovered entirely, but I rebuilt it piece by piece, proving to myself that betrayal doesn't define the rest of your life. I also took steps to support my sibling. Therapy became a shared space, and we started talking openly about Patricia, about fear, about the years stolen from us. We laughed again, cautiously at first, but eventually freely. Our relationship deepened in a way that nothing, no betrayal, no poison could erase. One crisp morning, standing in my mom's garden, the same one Patricia had once decorated with roses, I inhaled the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. No panic, no nausea, just calm. I realized I had survived the unimaginable. I had faced the person who destroyed my trust and emerged not broken, but stronger. I learned to trust again. Slowly, carefully, intentionally. With therapy, reflection, and the patience of those around me, I found healthy love, rebuilt relationships, and established boundaries that protected me. I let go of the people who had failed me, the greedy lawyer, the cousin cop, and embraced the ones who believed, who supported, who loved without condition. Patricia's shadow lingered, yes, but it no longer controlled my life. I could eat without fear, sleep without terror, and interact with the world without flinching. I found joy in simple things: toy cars on my desk, laughing with my sibling, cooking a meal without overthinking every ingredient. Most importantly, I learned that betrayal, even when it breaks you down to your core, does not have to define your future. It can teach you boundaries, resilience, and the value of genuine connection. I still carry the scars, but I wear them like armor rather than chains. I survived, I recovered, and I now live a life defined not by fear, but by love, trust, and the courage to start over. And for the first time in years, I can say I'm truly free. The nightmare ended, but the victory that hard won, painstaking recovery was all